Hello and welcome. This is my Vortex Campaign faction overview guide, specifically for the faction of Eataine. So, we're going to start a new campaign on the Eye of the Vortex campaign, and we're going to select Tyrion as the Lord of the Eataine faction. Okay, so let's take a quick look at a couple of different things here. Right, so first of all, we're playing as the High Elves. Okay, a fairly balanced race. Pretty focused on just like they have good infantry, they have good missile units. They're a fairly well-rounded faction. They don't really have any particularly challenging or obscure campaign mechanics. Right, there's not a lot of like high risk, high reward stuff when it comes to them. It's low risk, moderate reward. Right. Okay. In addition, they have a handful of pretty high level. I mean, they have dragons, right? They have dragons and phoenixes. They have some very powerful, very expensive high level units. They also have some high level infantry. If you have the DLC, they have one of the strongest missile units in the game. If you don't have the DLC, they still have a lot of really effective infantry and missile units. They have okay cavalry. But it really depends on who you're fighting, and specifically playing as Eataine, since we're going to be fighting other High Elves, your cavalry isn't really going to come into play that greatly. But they still have excellent infantry and missile units, like ranged units is what I mean, and then they have like some good high tier like monstrous units. Okay. They don't really have very good artillery. In fact, they really only have the one piece of artillery. Luckily enough, we start with one. It's a useful tool to use nonetheless. But they really don't have good artillery. So just some things to know about the High Elves. In particular, for this faction, we're going to start, if you can see on the map here, we start in this northeastern continent. This is going to be largely populated by the High Elves, okay? There's a couple of very minor exceptions, but they become irrelevant very early on in the game, okay? And this is where you're going to focus most of your time and energy. The upside is, since it's a mirror matchup, you kind of know what to expect, and you can focus almost a little bit more on exploiting the weakness of your enemy, rather than trying to stick to your strengths and build them. But it's a good way to learn both, right? It keeps fighting simple. It won't necessarily teach you all the ins and outs of the faction and how to deal with different opponents, at least not until you get later on into the campaign. But I think that's a good thing. This is what I would consider the primary faction of the High Elves. It's a great place to start if you've never played this game before. There are some challenges associated with it, but it's really either... This is one of two that I would say are probably the easiest and clearly most powerful characters and factions to start as. Okay, so like I said, they start here in the northeast. They've got a decent number of faction effects here. Okay, so we can see for Eataine specifically, their faction overall has increased diplomatic relations with other High Elves, which is pretty nice considering we start on a continent full of them. We have construction time reduction for a specific building, which we'll get to that later. We'll show you what that looks like. And then we have recruitment duration reduced 1 turn for infantry and cavalry units. So if you do like cavalry, at least it gives you a good turnaround time on them. But like I said, with the powerful infantry and missile units that they have, we're going to be able to recruit them a little bit faster, which will help, get our armies built up really quickly and allow us to not, spend quite as much time building up. It's minimal, but it'll add up over time and help speed you up. For the Lord specifically, for Tyrion, he as a leader has these bonus effects. Okay, upkeep reduction for all of these units here, and we'll kind of get into the game and we'll review those so you can see what they're like. But these are all mostly lower rank, like Silver Helms are middle tier cavalry. The Silverin Guard are middle tier infantry. Spearmen, Rangers, Archers, low tier infantry and missile unit. Okay, and then recruit rank for the Lothern Sea Guard. Again, another mid tier unit, and we'll kind of get into that as well. This is actually pretty powerful, and you'll see why pretty shortly. We start with a Phoenix, which is pretty good. This is a tier 4 unit for the faction, so this is already a pretty powerful unit to start. As well as starting with the single piece of artillery, which it's pretty powerful. It has the armor piercing missiles. It's going to be really useful early on, and it also means that we don't have to try to rush for an artillery building just to get our hands on one. I'm not really going to cover the race attributes right now. I mean, a couple of these are pretty self-explanatory. The espionage and the martial prowess. Just go ahead and read that segment. They're fairly self-explanatory. We could look specifically at it, but martial prowess is basically just a bonus that's given to your units when they're in combat. I don't think we're going to be able to see it there. And we'll cover the intrigue aspect later on once we get into the review. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start a campaign and just kind of give us an overview of what the campaign is going to look like on turn 1 so we can get a look at that. Alright, so now we're here in game, and whenever I start up a new game with even a new faction or a new race that's unfamiliar to me, I think the best place to start is the building browser, okay? Because not only does this show you all the buildings that you can make, so you can understand what you're supposed to build, how to manage your economy, and how to, kind of be successful on the campaign map in terms of development, but it also shows you all the military units you can recruit. And in addition to that, it kind of shows you specifically how good they are, right? Not just the source building, but if you were to just have the full list of units you could recruit from, you were to look at that, let's see, I don't think we'll be able to see it here, but even just looking at this, right? It's hard to really say unless I hover over each one and look at the stats, which one is better, which one is worse. I mean, you can compare the cost, you can compare the recruitment time, but if I look in the building browser, I can see very clearly, here's my tier 5 units. These are going to be the best units that I have available, right? Here's my tier 1 units. These are what I'm going to be using more early on in the game, right? So it just helps break things down like that pretty well. So let's kind of review the buildings that you have available as the High Elves. There's not really anything specific to the faction, but so we'll still go over it. I mean, you've got a couple different basic military buildings here. This is going to be your missile and melee infantry, right? Your kind of lower rank of those. And then here we have a cavalry building, so for getting some cavalry units. And then we have the Grove, which is a bit of a specialty building. You can see it has a bunch of little things, right? It gives you a little bit of a trade resource. It gives you a little bit of Untainted, which is to counter corruption. And then it unlocks the recruitment of a few different units. So we have a Great Eagle, a flying, single entity unit. We have the White Lions of Shrace, kind of a specialty infantry. And then we have the War Lions of Shrace, which are, they're war beasts. You could compare them to maybe cavalry. They're fast, they're similar to cavalry. It's hard to place them. War beasts is probably the best way to classify them. And let's see if we can really quickly get a look at this martial prowess ability. So this is what I was talking about in the game beforehand. Basically, just if you're above 50% health, you get these bonuses. You get a bonus mostly to your dodge chance, right? So that's just a real quick coverage of what that is. For advanced military, we've got the Smiths building, which does increase your local recruitment capacity at the highest level. Also unlocks, this is where you get that artillery building from. And then other than that, you get some chariot units, okay? From this building, the Mages Tower, the main thing that you get from here is the mages. You can see you can't really see, there we go. There's a ton of different mage types, all the different lores of magic, right? So this allows you to recruit a mage hero unit, and as you level it up, this will increase your capacity for the mage hero, as well as for the Lore Master of Hoeth hero unit, okay? So those are both pretty valuable. You're probably going to want one of these. You're definitely going to want one of these in every building, in every capital city. Magic is one of your most powerful tools as any faction in the game, particularly so for the High Elves, who certainly excel at it. The Lore Master of Hoeth, this is more of a hybrid unit, and they're pretty good, but we'll kind of cover that once we get through the whole list. Because we've also got Swords Masters of Hoeth, so this is your damage dealing higher tier infantry. Okay, the next building, Shrine of Asuryan. This building gives you Untainted, so this is for counteracting corruption, and this also is the building that, if we look at our faction effects, Shrine of Cain building. I'm sorry, that's up here. That's that's not really going to come into play until somewhere in the middle of the campaign or possibly later. So we're not going to worry about that. Basically, there's we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that as a specific faction mechanic, okay? The Shrine of Asuryan is something different. This gives you Untainted. It also unlocks the Phoenix units for recruitment. So these are a pretty powerful, single entity, flying, monstrous unit. You can see they're pretty expensive. The Frost Phoenix is more of a defensive unit. It gives an area of effect buff. The Flame Phoenix is more of an offensive unit. We also have your Phoenix Guard, which are your more defensive, high-tier infantry. They're still quite strong, don't mistake them, but they're meant to serve a more line-holding role. Then you have the Arcane Phoenix. Keep in mind that some of these units will not be present if you don't have certain DLC. The Arcane Phoenix is an example. The Lion Chariots of Shrace are an example. The War Lions of Shrace are another example. I believe that Shadow Warriors still exist, even if you don't have the DLC. And then this building itself entirely, the Handmaidens Gallery, and neither of these, the Hero Unit and the Missile Infantry, those will not exist if you don't have the DLC. Okay? There's a couple different ones. Get back on track here, we've got the Dragon's Lair. This is where you can recruit dragons, right? Similar to the Phoenixes, these are pretty expensive units. They don't have the same kind of like offensive and defensive usage. They just have different powers that are supposed to be, like this says strong versus a single unit. This says weak versus a single combatant. This is good against large combatants. So this is in theory supposed to be a little bit more anti-large. This is supposed to be more like anti-infantry. You can see their cost is different. Their stats are a little different. It just, it kind of depends on what you have the money for and what looks cool to you. Then there's also the Star Dragon, which is just generally like the superior form. Good against armor, powerful explosion, good against large combatants. And then you actually have a really high tier cavalry unit, which, again, it's good. I mean, this is a tier 5 unit. It should be really good, but it's difficult to use cavalry well, and especially because if you're fighting the High Elves, I mean, spearmen are accessible to any High Elf who owns any city, even without having basic military, and spearmen counter cavalry fairly well. So, use at your own risk. They're a really cool unit. There's another legendary lord, Imric, the free DLC character, who's maybe a little bit better for using these. But again, you've got your own playstyle to craft, so go for it. The last advanced military is the Handmaidens Gallery. Basically, this is so you can get the Handmaiden Hero and the Sisters of Avalorn Missile Infantry. Potentially one of the best ranged units in the entire game. Maybe the Way Watchers for the Wood Elves is on par with it, but we don't yet have an option for that in the Vortex campaign anyway. Again, this requires a DLC. They're really good if you can get them. For defense in the Straits of Lothern, since this is a capital province for a major faction, you can see we have a really solid garrison if we get it up to 20. So there's no walls building. We just have your standard patrols building, which is supposed to be helps with public order under corruption and makes Skaven undercities discoverable. This is basically if you think the Skaven have infiltrated a city, you would build this. Here we've got your standard growth building. Gives you a little bit of a casualty replenishment bonus, and it makes your cities grow faster so that you can increase your population surplus, so that you can level up your main building. We have this industry building, which gives us income. Probably want as many of these as you can have. You also produce Elven Trinkets resource, which is a trade resource. However, it's not quite as useful for Tyrion and the Eataine faction, because we start on this continent, which is full of High Elves, so they're all capable of producing it, right? So maybe if we were playing as Teclis way down in the southwest, I'm not going to scroll there right now, it would be a little bit more useful because nobody's going to be producing these, so you'd have a really great trade resource that also gives you income from the same building. So just to give you an idea of what that's for. We then have your pretty standard public order building. It does also give you some income generated. You don't really get this building for the income, you get it for the public order. I think it's usually good to have one of these in each of your capitals, but it kind of depends on on where you are in the campaign and what research you have done. You might not need it past a certain point. We have the Elven Gardens. This is another hero building, okay? It does also give you income from entertainment building, but that's this building, so like, 30% bonus to 240. I mean, I guess technically this gives you more income than the Elven Fairground, but it's tough to say that you would want to build your economy off the back of this. However, with that being said, it does still give you the this is how you increase your capacity for the noble hero, which the mage and the noble are both extremely important. The noble for being a troop replenishment unit. It's also a melee hero, so if you don't have a melee lord, you can still have a noble hero to kind of hold things down for you. The replenished troops is obviously very important as well. In many of these buildings you see tie into technology, but we'll kind of come back to that point. The last building here is the embassy. This generates influence, which is a unique resource for the High Elves that's used for their unique campaign mechanic. It also increases trade faction-wide and increases income from ports for all regions in this province. So there's going to be, we're on like an island here. It's hard to see, but there's going to be a lot of port cities all around this island. So you would probably want to make use of this. And especially once you get later into the game, there is kind of a tipping point where 5% increased income from trade might actually be more valuable than the the 200 income generated by the Elven Fairground. Again, it depends on where you start and how valuable the Elven trinkets are to you as a trade resource. But so even then, if they are a valuable trade resource, you might still end up making more money by increasing your income from trade. Obviously, you want this in any place where there's 2 or more ports, or even where there's a port in the capital, because that is going to have a lot of income associated with it. Okay. And yeah, lastly, let's look at the landmark buildings here for Lothern, right? So we have the Gates of Lothern. It's the port building, but it is a unique port. This is just insane. It even gives you, at the maximum level, gives you a better recruit rank bonus for the Lothern Sea Guards unit, which is just astounding, right? Like this combined with Tyrion's bonus would mean you get very close to max level Lothern Sea Guards just upon recruitment, if you recruit them with Tyrion, at least in this province. But even without Tyrion being there, you still get them halfway ranked up right from the get-go. Additional tradable resource produced faction-wide, obviously that's pretty insane as well. So it's just a great, and you have no choice, I can't demolish this, so you're going to have it anyway, but you're going to want it. The other building is the Court of the Phoenix King. You can see it reduces the influence cost for your actions, which, again, we'll cover that a little later. Increases public order here, gives you faction-wide Lord recruit rank and Hero recruit rank. Again, just another really, really solid landmark. It's very expensive, so maybe if you can get some construction cost reduction, but still really good. So what kind of stuff do you want to build? What does a typical city look like? At the maximum level, let's say we have a 7-slot city, right? Because Lothern has 9 slots, but this is the exception, not the rule. Okay, well, we have a port. Maybe if you didn't have a port, you'd want the income building, right? So that's 1 slot. 2nd slot probably goes to the entertainment building for the public order. 3rd slot to the Elven Court for the hero. 4th slot to the mages building, okay? Because you want the hero units here. So we've got 4 slots there. And that's 4 out of 7 slots. Now, a lot of the times I end up putting, it depends on what kind of military units you have in adjacent provinces, or what kind of special resource buildings you have, right? Like if you have some kind of trade resource building, that would be slot 5. Depending on if that gives you a bonus, right? Like there is here in Calidor's Repose, exotic animals. I can tell you that building would give you a recruit rank bonus to something like dragons, right? So then you would probably want to couple that with the dragons for your 6th slot. And for the 7th slot, it depends on how much military recruitment you really need, right? Like, do you want to put in an Ithilmar Smith just for the recruitment capacity? Do you want to just put in a Citizens Militia so you can get Lothern Sea Guards? Or do you want to just throw an Elven Embassy in there for the influence and the trade? Those are generally the options that I would want to go with. If you have the DLC, you're probably going to want to sneak a Handmaiden's Gallery in there, so it can get tough to kind of juggle all these things. Maybe if you don't need too many Handmaiden heroes, I mean, they do also have the Replenish Troops bonus. If you're not really big on stacking, 4 heroes in every single army, maybe you don't feel like you need it. Maybe you only need 1 or 2 of these just to recruit the Sisters of Avalorn. Or maybe you really don't like nobles and you really like handmaidens, but I think that the other bonuses that you get from this, like the entertainment building, I know I said before it's not really that big of a number, but it's still worth coupling with these 2 buildings. So that's what I think capitals should probably look like, right? Mage building, income if you can fit it, unless there's like a port building. You want the public order and the aristocracy building. You probably have room for the Elven Embassy. You probably have room for a landmark or a special resource building. And then you have room for another advanced military building. Otherwise, you could cut maybe the embassy, or you maybe cut like the landmark building if you don't feel you need it. Or even if you cut like the income building, then you could maybe fit in another basic military or another advanced military building, right? So now let's talk about the actual units you can produce, okay? What do I think is a good early game composition for the High Elves? And specifically, we're going to be talking about if we're playing as Eataine and we're working on conquering the donut, right? So if you look here on tier 1, we don't have a lot of options, right? Spearmen archers from your capital. The basic military building gives us archers with light armor, and it gives us rangers. Rangers, again, are another DLC unit, okay? And actually, the Silver and Guard here are a DLC unit as well. So, and honestly, I don't know. I see the AI use rangers. I personally have not had great results with them. Early game, I think that the best option for you is, like, I don't even know that you really need this basic military building. Is there? Yeah, it's not even tied to any research. Frankly, I don't think you need this because you can get spearmen and archers from this building. Like, maybe you want archers with light armor, but you don't really need Lothern Sea Guard because you have Lothern Sea Guards with shields that you can recruit from the port. That gives you a recruit rank bonus to Lothern Sea Guards. Now, if maybe if you want Shadow Warriors, but even then I don't think you need it. An early game army for the High Elves is going to look, especially specifically for the High Elves in general, is going to look like spearmen, archers, and maybe a couple bolt throwers, right? You're going to want, 4 to 6 spearmen, 1 to 2 bolt throwers, and the rest archers, right? Because a handful of spearmen will be able to hold the line. You can make a nice checkerboard formation and get the spearmen kind of on the front side, and then just have 3 rows of archers. You can get, if you have like 12 archers, 5 spearmen, 2 bolt throwers, and Tyrion, you're going to stomp a lot of stuff because your archers are just going to pour out so much damage, and your spearmen plus Tyrion will be able to hold the line, right? That's what a good early game army looks like. Once you start building follow-up armies, you're probably going to stick to the same formula for a little bit. Spearmen and archers are really solid. At a certain point, ooh, wait, these are unshielded, so maybe you do want this building. At a certain point, you'll probably want to start translating to Lothern Sea Guards with shields, even if you just replace the spearmen with these. Just because these are these are spearmen and archer hybrid units, and they have shields. It's insane, okay? These are insane value troops. Early on, you probably don't have the money, and the upkeep bonus from Tyrion does not apply to Lothern Sea Guard, sadly. So you really want to do the spearmen archers, but eventually you'll want to transfer over. But really what I wanted to say before, like once you build like a second or third army, you basically just want spearmen, archers. They're pretty cheap, they're effective, and you're going to want to try to get mages and noble, like a mage and a noble into one mage, one noble into each of those armies, right? That will service you very well. You could maybe cut like for the noble cut a spearman. For the mage, cut an archer, right? And now you've got this really nice, like, solid, well-crafted army. Those are going to carry you for a while. As you get into the mid-game, it's more of a stylistic choice. If you really like chariots, you can go for the chariots. For myself personally, I don't find them to be very effective, so I don't use them. Specifically for Eataine, and maybe I know this is going to be a controversial pick, I usually build a grove, okay? One, because Tyrion has unique for his unique equipment, one of these quests will require you to have a certain number of white lines of Shrace in your army. So you're going to have to recruit them anyway, so you're going to have to make this building. But the reason you might want these is because they're armor piercing, right? And spearmen have they don't have a ton of armor, right? But like any of these early game infantry units that you're facing, like when you're playing against the High Elves, they're going to have some armor. If you can get a handful of armor piercing units, that's kind of your advantage. And really, that's what mid-game unit composition is about. I think some people might say that mid-game unit composition in the campaign doesn't even really exist, right? For the most part, you stick to your basic, like you could literally stick to Spearman Archer until you're ready to create like a full army of tier 4, tier 5 units. And I think that that's true. For me, the mid-game is about that turning point where, well, now you've grown your capital enough to get some additional like alternative military buildings, whether they're basic or advanced, and it's about kind of grabbing the kind of unit that will give you an advantage against whatever you're fighting, just to kind of help tilt the scales of the battle in your favor ever so slightly. So specifically for Eataine, I think that is the White Lines of Shrace. This building kind of sucks in general. You basically should only ever build one of these and then never build it again. And probably demolish it once you're ready to delete those units from your army and you've completed the quest to recruit them, or like to have 4 in Tyrion's army. Okay. But as a niche pick, that's what you do in the mid game, right? Mid game looks like replacing your spearmen with Lothern Sea Guard so that your spearmen can also shoot arrows. Possibly replacing some of your archers with Shadow Warriors, because these are some pretty solid missile units as well. Now, I might be mistaken. These might be a DLC unit, but I don't believe that they are. So that's kind of where your transition is, right? You replace your spearmen with spearmen, but they shoot arrows. You replace your archers with better archers, like Stalk, Master Ambusher. They're pretty solid units. You maybe pull in a niche unit, like maybe the Great Eagles, maybe the White Lines of Shrace. If you really don't like that, you can do Silver Helms, since they do have upkeep reduction when recruited by Tyrion, or when in Tyrion's army. But frankly, the problem with cavalry fighting against the High Elves is you're going to be running up against spearmen and archers, which are just going to decimate your cavalry. So I don't really recommend those. So that's really all there is to the mid game. Like you can see, the only other option you really have is like the bolt throwers artillery. I think you should always have 1 or 2 of these in each army, because it forces any enemy who doesn't have them to come to you. And even if they do have artillery of their own, bolt throwers actually have the ability to switch between 2 types of firing types. And you basically use this multi-round shot to just shoot at infantry, force the enemy to come to you. You would use the single round shot to focus enemy artillery, however, because only a couple hits from this will absolutely, this is like having a cannon and a mortar in one. Again, it's tier 3, so it's not that powerful, but just having a couple in an army to force the enemy to walk towards you, especially if you have a defensive spearman and army composition, will help a lot. I think that these should be present at least 1 in every army. Plus, this gives you the siege attacker. This allows you to attack a city without having to build siege equipment. So just all around good stuff. We've got chariots here in the mid tier, but I don't really find a use for them. The cavalry I don't really think is that useful for this particular faction and their campaign. I do think that there's uses for them in other campaigns, and they're certainly not bad units. I mean, some shielded, armored shock cavalry, they can be pretty good. Even if you are on this campaign, you could still find a use for like 2 silver helms in your army, right? But once we start getting into the late game, so again, you absolutely want a mage, you absolutely want a noble so that you can have the troop replenishment, you have a decent melee hero that will just get stronger as time goes on, you'll have a mage, a spell casting hero, which there's all sorts of different mages. There's plenty of guides out there on which like spell casting lores are the best. You know, pick at your own discretion, choose what fits your playstyle. Late game for the High Elves, you know, you can kind of do dragon spam if you want to. It's going to be really, really expensive though. What I usually end up doing is, you know, late game, you can kind of replace your spearmen with these Phoenix Guard. These are just a really solid all-around unit. Even though they are supposed to be more of a defensive unit, they're still going to perform very well. Like armored, armor-piercing, anti-large, charge defense against all, right? Really tough to beat that. You want to put 4 to 6 of these in an army. That'll be solid composition. Swordsmaster of Hoeth, I really wish that I liked them more. They seem like it. I want to say that you should have 4 or 5 Phoenix Guard, 2 Swordsmasters of Hoeth, right? That's what sounds right. Armored, armor-piercing, anti-infantry. Wow, they can even deflect shots. They don't even need shields. But they just don't hold up that well in combat. They really don't hold out as well as the Phoenix Guards seem to. They're supposed to be like damage dealers. They have the anti-infantry, so like maybe you can... I mean, you can see it even shows they have like a bronze shield, right, for the deflect shots. If you like auto-resolve, definitely stay away from Swordsmasters of Hoeth. You'll be replacing them all the time. On the battlefield, I think that they can find some use, right? They trade out some of the defense of the Phoenix Guard for melee attack, right? But I don't know. In general, I think the reality is the Swordsmaster of Hoeth is not really your damage dealer in most fights as the High Elves. It's your Lothern Sea Guard or your Shadow Warriors. These are your damage dealer, right? These are the units that you're using to hit your enemy and hurt them, right? Your infantry is mostly just to hold the line. So just something to keep in mind. I'm not saying, like, if you really like your melee infantry, go ahead and build like 8 Phoenix Guard and 5 or 6 Swordsmaster of Hoeth, and with 1 Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, you're going to pull the enemy army to you, and you're going to be able to get some great melee hits. But obviously it's going to be tough if you're fighting the Dark Elves. They have a ton of dark shards and all the, or like, what are the other units called? I don't remember. But if they have a bunch of ranged units and Dark Elf ranged units are armor piercing, you're going to get slaughtered with a full melee attachment. So, yeah, in general, I think, right, like 5 or 6 Phoenix Guard, 6 to 8 Shadow Warriors or Lothern Sea Guards, maybe a mix of both. Because if you have Lothern Sea Guard, you can use these as spearmen to protect your bolt throwers, but they also have the ability to shoot back, right? So these are great for like countering cavalry flanking, right? Ideal unit for that. They shoot cavalry on the way in, they beat them in the melee fight, they shoot cavalry on the way out. Your core archers will probably want to be Shadow Warriors unless you have the DLC, in which case, if you have Phoenix Guard and Sisters of Avalorn, like that, this is your damage dealer, right? If you have the DLC, you just get Sisters of Avalorn. You dumpster everything that looks at you twice. And then, like, I usually like to put about 4 dragons in an army. Maybe 2 or 3 if you don't feel like you have the money, or you just don't feel like you have the desire, I guess, to micromanage them. If you feel like you have the money, make 6 of them. Throw 6 Star Dragons in every army. I guess that's probably not really that efficient, right? But they have like high damage, right? They some armor, they're armored piercing, high melee attack and defense stats. The problem is that monstrous units, when they get bogged down, like when they get surrounded by melee units, they can kind of get stomped a little bit. And again, in this campaign specifically, if we're fighting mostly High Elves, okay, and you land a Star Dragon in a pile of spearmen, it's going to take a lot of damage. But dragons are really, really, really good flanking units. And this is why I don't think that the cavalry are really all that powerful like these. And these are still good. Dragon princes are great shock cavalry. If you want to throw 2 of these in every army, I'm not going to argue with you on that. But star dragons, if you have like 2 star dragons, 2 sun dragons, you fly them all towards the enemy backline. Whichever ones draw the archer fire, you pull them back towards your front line, and you either use the dragon breath spell on the units that are like the missile units that are shooting your dragon and deal significant damage to them, or you hit on the flank of wherever your melee infantry is engaged with theirs. You hit their melee infantry with a breath spell, and all of a sudden their melee infantry is just absolutely devastated, right? In addition, the ones that get passed into their backline, you use dragons to take out enemy artillery, right? Like the Eagle Claw bolt throwers are also good at this, but a star dragon throwing down a breath spell on an artillery and a handful of artillery troops and then landing on it, 45 charge bonus, like getting a huge charge attack and being able to dish significant damage. It can clear out an artillery really fast for you. So I think that those are great. Plus, like, they're flying, right? The problem with cavalry is they're not flying. Like, this is a not flying unit, so it's going to get bogged down by anything on the ground. Their ground units are going to kind of follow you if you try to flank their artillery. Less likely to happen with the Star Dragon. Sorry, quick drink of water there. Now, the last unit to really talk about is Phoenixes. And, you know, I would actually say that this maybe is another good mid-game unit, right? Instead of having 2 Star Dragons and 2 Sun Dragons, you know, maybe you want to, I mean, you definitely want to get, like, a Shrine of a Sanctuary of Asuryan up early. Like, this should be, the Phoenix Guard should probably be the first tier 5 unit that you go for. You probably want to build a Tower of Mages before you build a Shrine of Asuryan, right? Like, as soon as I hit tier 3, I know that I'm building a Mage Tower and an Elven Forge, so I can get this and I can get one of these, right? But then the next thing I'm probably going to want to build is this Shrine of Asuryan. So in the mid-game, before you're really stacking Phoenix Guard, you can grab a couple of Phoenixes, right? Remember, this one is with the DLC, and these Arcane Phoenixes are pretty cool. To be honest, I haven't played around with them much, just because, like, I don't know, like, why not just get a dragon? Like, maybe I would prefer this over a Sun Dragon, right? Maybe. But it's hard to say, right? They've got some really cool abilities. But it's just tough. I don't know. It's tough for me to say. Arcane Phoenixes are actually pretty good, but I just don't use them that much personally because I end up with dragons, and I like dragons. But in the early, like, to mid-game, right, this is another great, like, turning point unit where the Frostheart Phoenix, you know, you can see it has magic attack. It has armor-piercing weapon. It has, like, and then it has this aura bonus, which... so you use this as a support unit, right? You kind of keep this in the back line near your missile units, and once their melee line hits, you charge this into their melee line, because you don't want it to get focused. You want your melee to engage first, but this gives a huge bonus, or, well, a huge debuff to the enemy, right? Reduces their attack, their chance to hit, and their armor-piercing damage, right? So this is a pretty significant debuff. To be honest, if you're more of the defensive player... Mid-game is where you have like 4 Lothern Sea Guards, and you can honestly stick with, like, archers, you know, 8 to 12 archers, otherwise, like, you know, 6 Shadow Warriors, 6 archers, or just all Shadow Warriors if you have the money for it. But, like, you do that, and then you have, like, 2 to 4 Frostheart Phoenixes. These crash into the lines and make your Lothern Sea Guard just that much stronger, because they're never going to get hit, right? 40 defense plus, like, you know, plus that malice of -9 weapon or melee attack. It's pretty nice. These are nice. Frostheart Phoenix, really nice unit. I mean, they're also expensive, so maybe you could just be going dragons at that point. But just so you understand what the purpose of these is. The Flamespire Phoenix, this is more of an offensive unit, right? This unit has a chance to resurrect itself if it dies, okay? Or if it's about to die, it either dies or it regenerates itself to 50%, which is kind of insane. So you can use it a little bit with more risk, but obviously there's no guarantee that this works. Yeah, miscast chance 50%. So wouldn't really throw it out there intending to lose it, but if something bad happens, there's a chance you get it back. It also has this Wake of Fire ability. You can see it has 10 uses and a 0-second cooldown. So this is like a flying bomber unit. You can just kind of hover this over really whatever unit you want and use this to drop bombs. So you can, like, what I do a lot of the time, and if you watch my campaign, if you watch a campaign of this, you might see me do this, where, I start, as Eataine, you start with one of those, right? And so basically what you do is you take that unit, you set it on one end of your infantry line. When their infantry line hits yours, you just send it a move command across your infantry line, and you drop bombs on all of the enemy melee infantry units engaged with yours. It's going to do some damage, and then maybe you even just fly it in to attack their archers. You kind of want to be careful if they have a lot of archers. You don't want to send this thing out there isolated, or it's going to get pinned down and it's going to get shot to pieces. But as you can see, it has a good melee attack. These, I wouldn't really send your Phoenixes really far out. They're almost more support units than they are attacking units, but they're still really good supportive frontline units, right? So just so you understand kind of where they are. So that's kind of my idea. That's my views, my current personal views on how the High Elf army works, right? That's what this early game armies, mid game, and late game armies are going to look like and feel like. That's how you operate as the High Elves, particularly for this campaign, but most of these things apply in general. Obviously, if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, feel free to add those in the comments here on this video. I would love to hear what you have to say about what a good High Elf army composition looks like. I'm sure there's people out there who can make better recommendations than I can as well. With that being said, I think we've covered everything that's in here in the building browser that I'd really like to go over. So let's go on and look at the research for the High Elves, okay? So you can see theirs is broken up into different sections, right? They've got different tiers of research, okay? And the most important thing to notice is that each tier has a required building, right? So each of these is locked behind specific stuff. So like required building archive, that mage tower, right? This is the thing you need to get tier 3 or the second tier of research, right? So you're going to want that building pretty early on. Grand Repository and Ithilmar Smith. So here's our Ithilmar Smith. I believe, no, this is not the Grand Repository. Oh, okay, Mage's building. So ultimately, you're, like I said, at tier 3, you want to build one of each of these. When you hit tier 4, you get each of these, and now you've unlocked your next tier of military advancement. So not only does it coincide with the units, but it also coincides with the research. The final one is Dragon Keep and Towers of Mages. So you need a max level Tower of Mages. You need a max level Dragon Keep. It's kind of weird how that works out, and I don't think you really need to worry about it until you have at least 3 provinces under your control. Because you're not, I wouldn't really be building lots of dragons and dragon armies at that point in time. But just know that this is where, like, these are the different tiers of research, right? This is going to be upgrades for Spearmen, Lothern Sea Guard, Spearmen, Rangers, Archers, Lothern Sea Guard. So Lyrian Reavers. I want to say that this is for your Bolt Thrower, Great Eagle, and Warlord. But so you can see none of this group of research goes above a tier 3 unit, right? Some of this stuff is going to be useless by the end game. So that's why you kind of want to push up as much as you can, right? Here's a much, much better and much more all-encompassing research for some of your ranged units, right? Here's upkeep and recruitment cost reduction for some of those basic units. Another wide-reaching upgrade, right? And so I encourage you to kind of look through this yourself. Which items you pick specifically will depend on your play style, what units you're choosing to fight with and focus on, and also the campaign specifically, right? So I'm not going to necessarily pick the same units if I'm playing as Eataine because I'm fighting against the High Elves. So I'm not necessarily going to research the same things like the Wasn't there? Yeah, this, like this. I'm absolutely not going to want to get this research because I'm never going to use those units in this campaign, at least for myself personally. And then the very bottom one, so this Elven Embassy, we've already looked at the Elven Embassy building. And so what that, these are all built specific to your, like your resource, like the trade resource buildings, right? You need a max level trade resource building to do these. I wouldn't focus on this too early on, but you'll want to get this. I mean, it'll happen pretty naturally, right? Cultural advancements. Yeah, Shrine of Asuryan and Elven Court. That's the one that always gets me hung up. Shrine of Asuryan and Elven Court, right? You'll get the Elven Court naturally. You want to be careful not to delay the Shrine of Asuryan for too long, because this is all of your, like, economic. Like most of these are all like military unit upgrades, upkeep, cost reduction, recruitment, damage, armor, charge bonus, range, melee attack, melee defense, recruit rank, right? These are all military unit bonuses. Cultural advancement is all of your, like, campaign bonuses, all of the different stuff that you can do in that aspect of the game. And so, like, construction costs, things like that. So you don't want to slack off on this for too long, because this can be really useful, and it's kind of a weird combination of buildings to get that you might not get early on. So just something to keep in mind that you'll want to look at some point in the game. Alright, so now that we covered the research, let's just talk about the rights that are available to the High Elves. So we've got the 4 different rights here. We'll just kind of go through them in order. We've got the Invocation of Hoeth, which you can see Winds of Magic power bonus, experience gain for archmages, mages, and lore master of Hoeth, experience per turn increase, and action success chance increase. So this is one that I would say it's not very useful early game when you don't have any mages, right? You can see you can't even use it until you make the archive building. I don't know that I would necessarily spam it until you really have a decent chunk, but once you have, like, a mage in every army, you can probably just use this off cooldown. Maybe you want to save it for some of your tougher battles and turn it on right before that, just to get that increased Winds of Magic power reserve. The experience gain I don't think is super useful personally. The hero action success chance would be good for stealing technology from people, but honestly that you would just do with like the different, like, the skill bonuses that you get for each unit anyway. So I don't think that that's really an important piece of it. It's really the Winds of Magic power reserve. So you can just, unless you have a specific battle you want to save it for, I just kind of run it whenever you get the chance. The Invocation of Isha. Now this is one you want to save for specific moments, right? It has a very long cooldown of 40 turns, especially compared to the rest of these. It lasts for a decent amount of time, but the thing is, like, so Untainted for all provinces, that's pretty good, but it's not usually super necessary. Like, either just like, Untainted just causes public order problems. There's multiple ways to solve public order problems and to solve corruption problems, so I wouldn't recommend using this unless your situation's pretty desperate, or you would see, like, a really universal benefit to like a significant benefit to it. The key here is this immune to attrition, right? Specifically for this campaign, eventually you're going to want to attack the Galleon's Graveyard here, okay? There is a Vampire Coast faction that lives here, and it is inevitable that they will come and try to raid the western coast here, and probably eventually declare war on you. When you go into... Here, let me grab Tyrion so I can show you. If I go out far enough into the water... Trying to find a spot where it'll happen. No? Okay, well, if I hover over, you can see. My cursor doesn't show it, but it says, fleets will suffer losses due to attrition when in deep waters. In order to get out here, you gotta go, you can even see, look at how, you see how short right around here my movements get? It's gonna take you several turns just to march onto the land in Galleon's Graveyard. You'll be suffering pretty heavy attrition along the way, unless you pop the Invocation of Isha, right? So this is great for invading enemy lands that have high corruption, or for, like, any territory that has high corruption, right? That's what you would want to use this for. Maybe you could throw it down really early on because it says after owning 3 settlements, you're probably not going to attack the vampires in, like, within the first 40 turns. So you could use it to get casualty replenishment really early on when you don't have any nobles or anything in your army for the replenishment rate. But besides that, this is one you kind of want to save for specific moments. Okay, the Invocation of Asuryan. This is another one that you spam out, right? Construction costs for all buildings. Again, unless there's like I've spent the last 15 turns building up to this moment where I'm going to make all of my expensive buildings all at once. Not a terrible idea, but in general, just having this active whenever you can, like, gives you the bonus influence, gives you public order, and it's got a pretty short cooldown of 20 turns. So I pretty much spam this one out whenever it's available. If you feel like you should save it for when you desperately need public order or desperately have chosen a moment to construct all your buildings at once, that's fine. But I don't think that you need to save it because of how frequently you get it. The last one, the Invocation of Vol. I don't really know how I feel about this one. This one, I don't even feel that it's that useful, quite frankly. I want to say that this is a unique one to Tyrion. Each of the rights kind of change a little bit from faction to faction. So you get recruitment cost reduction for some, like Swords Masters of Hoeth, White Lions of Shrace, Phoenix Guard, and Dragon Princes. But should you specifically use it for that? I don't know. I wouldn't really say that you should. Like Phoenix Guards Phoenix Guards are probably the only really good unit out of this bunch. Dragon Princes are those high-level cavalry. White Lions of Shrace are those off-brand infantry. Swords Masters of Hoeth, again, those are your damage dealer infantry, but you probably are better off with getting damage from your ranged units. Then it also gives an armor bonus to those units. So this is kind of strange, right? You have recruit cost and rank increase for these units. So you could use it for that, but so then you also get armor. Well, you're not going to recruit these units and then use them within the same 10 turns. I mean, maybe you'll use them within the same 10 turns, but so it's kind of a weird combination of bonuses. If you really like these units, if you really are a heavy, melee infantry and cavalry focused user, these are going to be great for you. And maybe at certain points in the campaign, depending on who you're fighting, they can be useful. But in general, I don't think that these effects are super useful. For me personally, it's this Vol's Hammer. Okay, this is the kind of ritual that you want to use at a specific point in time when you know you're going to take one fight or several fights where you are going to besiege an enemy, right? And so you can see, so this would give all armies the ability Vol's Hammer. You can use it twice. It's a powerful explosion that affects city walls and siege equipment. So what you do is you use this when you attack somebody, like you attack a capital city or a walled city, and you just cast this ability on the wall, and it just blows up that wall. It also works in defensive sieges, but that's not really what it's for, right? Because this allows you to launch siege battles instantly. So this means you could even besiege somebody and without building any siege equipment, just make 2 holes in their wall and march your units through. It's kind of a niche ability. I think maybe you could, honestly, at certain points in the game, I'd say you basically would just be using it to boost your Phoenix Guard recruit rank when you get them. Overall, I don't find this particular ritual super powerful. I think these other 2, Asuryan and Hoeth, you spam those out. Isha you use in specific circumstances. Vol's Invocation is more niche personally. Maybe other people like it. I don't really use it a ton, but so that's all the different rights for the High Elves. The last thing that we have to cover is their unique campaign mechanics. The one is espionage, right? Which if I make a trade deal with somebody, which I should be able to just do real quick with Yveres, gives you vision over all their territory, right? And it is something to discuss because, while trade agreements are great, while vision is great, but the problem is this can expose you to potential threats as well, right? There's a High Elf here that's fighting mostly Dark Elves in the Northwest, and if I make a trade agreement with them, I make myself visible to all of those Dark Elves, right? I'm not visible to any of them right now, so they're not really going to go to war with me right now. But if I make myself visible to them, then they will absolutely go to war with me, right? So that's like the risk that you take with that bonus. It can be very useful. Like, it's really nice for, like, it's a good way to meet other people too. Like, that's the upside of it, right? Now I can see Kotik, and they already like me a little bit. I can already get a trade agreement with them. And I didn't even know they existed at the start of this turn. And now I've detected trace, and I can get a trade agreement with them. Now, you shouldn't necessarily spam out trade agreements like this, because not everybody wants to be friends. Not every faction is going to like each other on the High Elf continent. But that being said, you can see how powerful it is as a tool. Like, there's positives and negatives to it, and so you can see this is one of the positives, right? I didn't even know these two upper factions existed, and now I have trade agreements with them and have increased my income. So just something to think about with the unique faction mechanic. We already kind of briefly, I touched on it, but just to review, martial prowess is another one of their unique things. The +2 melee attack and +12 melee defense, it's like it says constant, and it says disabled if hit points less than 50% base. So that means as long as they're above half health, they get this bonus. So it makes your units really powerful, and it encourages you to keep units at high strength. It gives you significant advantages early on in a fight. If you start losing a fight, things can turn south pretty quickly. So it's unfortunate, but it ultimately it's just a bonus, right? Really, it's just a bonus at the start. Sorry, quick drink of water there again. The last thing we have to discuss is intrigue at the court. Spend influence. So influence is that unique resource we talked about. Your nobles, does it show me? Yeah, your nobles can steal influence. You can use this ability on a settlement to gain a passive influence income for doing it. So, like, that's really good. Having a noble to scout, or two to scout ahead of your armies, and use this to gain this passive influence over time. Great technique to use, especially like scouting with High Elf heroes is really powerful. There's the embassy building that you can create that gives you the passive income per turn. I don't know if there's technology for it. What I'm trying to get to is the right that we just looked at for influence +2 per turn for 5 turns. Pretty kind of a petty amount. But so those are different ways to generate influence. And basically you just use it to improve relations or worsen relations between any two factions in the game, right? So, I don't know, let's say that I want Shrace and Kotik to go to war with each other. Just pick the two of them, and you click worsen relations, and it costs you a little bit of influence. The more you do this, the more it will increase the cost of this. So like if I click this 10 times, this is going to go up by a significant amount. The more, and over time the cost increases as well, but basically it tries to prevent you from spamming it out 30 times in a row on the same source, right? But so you could use this to hurt their relations between each other, to prompt them to go to war, or maybe to help give yourself an advantage if you're trying to initiate diplomacy with one of them. But really that's what I use it for a lot, right? If you want to get on good terms with somebody because you want to make a trade agreement or some other kind of act, like, diplomatic deal, or you're trying to confederate them, you use improve relations. And then you just get, like, essentially that's what you use it for, is for getting bonuses like that. And actually, before I forget, there's one other important usage of influence, and that is to get better lords, right? So if I look at, like, you can see each lords always come with traits, right? Well, for the High Elves, they'll actually have negative traits if you get one that costs no influence. The ones that cost a lot of influence actually have really good bonus traits. And then you have ones that cost like a low amount that have like mediocre traits. So just something to keep in mind, right? This building influence is another important part of the High Elves. So if you're not super experienced with using heroes, that if this is your first campaign, that might be a challenge, right? But it's something to get good practice with. Even if you don't do that, just building a lot of embassies will help get you there as well. There's also going to be like events. You can see your missions will sometimes give you influence. It's not too difficult to accumulate. I really do think that using heroes to accumulate it is the fastest way, without a doubt. But there's lots of different ways to get it passively. So that's what influence is. You use it for diplomatic relations, to either make two people dislike each other, or to, because then you can trick them into joining wars that you're a part of to help you out, or you can use it to just improve your relations to help confederate somebody. And it's a currency that's also used when recruiting lords and heroes. Like, I won't be able to see it because we don't have the recruitment buildings, but it's also used for heroes. So those are all of the unique mechanics for the High Elves. We've gone over the buildings, the research, and the rights. So that kind of gives you a better idea of how the race works overall and what those various aspects of their campaign is like, what's unique to the High Elves and their mechanics. With that being said, the next part that I want to go into is a more specific overview of the course that this campaign would take if you were playing as this faction specifically. So to start with that, the first thing we usually want to do is look at our legendary lord, right? Well, and even the faction overview itself. I mean, we've already looked at this, right? Recruitment duration reduced for infantry and cavalry, and increased diplomatic relations with High Elves, right? So those are important things to keep in mind, right? We have a better chance of negotiating with High Elves. We can produce infantry and cavalry units more easily. If we go to the traits for Tyrion, we would remember that he has like basic infantry, like melee and ranged infantry, upkeep reduction. He also has the silver helms, but I don't really think you'll use that. It's going to be really good for getting spearmen and archer army off the ground. And then he also has the Lothern Sea Guard recruit rank increase. So really good like trait for early and mid game bonuses, which will help give you an edge, propel you into the late game where you can use other things, like use his skills and use just the pure power of those units to kind of propel you to victory. But a really important thing to look at as Tyrion is his skill tree. Okay, this is specifically, he has these two skill branches on his top, this like second to top row. Now it doesn't say this here, but you can only unlock one of these, right? If I pick Majesty of Ulthuan, it will lock the bloodline of Anarion. Okay, and so this tree is more for like not necessarily passive or defensive, but the diplomatic approach to this campaign, whereas this is more for the aggressive approach to this campaign. You can see this tree actually hurts your public order a little bit, but it gives Tyrion a big melee attack and weapon bonus. Again, hurts your public order, but gives Tyrion even more bonuses. Again, hurts your public order, charge bonus, and causes fear. Hurts your public order, increases hit points and physical resistance. So you would pick this tree if you're like, I want my lord to be really powerful. I'm going to use Tyrion as like my hard carry melee hero, and I'm just going to fight people and not really worry about my public order too much, or at least be willing to sacrifice it a little bit. I mean, this is in the local province. This is in all provinces. So it's manageable, but basically these are bonuses to empower Tyrion at the cost of a little public order. On the other hand, this is more like this one, so you can see this is a bonus that affects your units in the army, right? But then you have stuff like Unifier, another diplomatic relations bonus, a public order bonus to all province, and an income from local. Recruitment costs for all armies reduced. Global recruitment duration reduction. Global recruitment capacity. And then ultimately upkeep unit reduction for all armies and untainted. So I guess I wouldn't even say this isn't necessarily the diplomatic route. Again, it's whether you want to focus on making Tyrion even more powerful, or whether you want kind of more like faction-wide bonuses. Because honestly, this upkeep 10% reduction for all units in all armies, that is a military-focused bonus, right? But the point being that, like, otherwise, if you pick the Bloodline of Anarion, you can really just send Tyrion in and get the work done wherever you want to go, whereas this is more for, like, expansionist and like, the diplomatic relations with High Elves, which kind of leads me... Like, so this is a decision you'll have to make. This is more playstyle based, right? Are you Do you want to have like one really strong lord leading the campaign, or do you want to kind of have a more balanced and like safer playthrough, right? Just something to ask yourself, but it does lead into what I consider kind of the primary decision that you have to make in order to be successful in this campaign. The biggest decision I think you have to make as Eataine, as this particular faction, is whether you're going to play more of the warmonger style or you're going to play more of the diplomat style, right? So it is a little bit reflected in a skill tree. Honestly, I don't really know, like, unless you would consider this more fun, I do think that this is a superior, like, public order bonus to all province, upkeep reduction, recruitment cost reduction. I think that that's the superior, like, skill tree for him. But ultimately, it's kind of like a diplomacy question, right? Or not ultimately. In addition, there's this separate diplomacy question. Do I want to fight my way through all of the High Elves on the continent? Or do I want to, you know, make peace treaties with them? And whether you choose the warmonger route or you choose the diplomat route, you have to do a little bit of both, right? Even if you're planning on fighting your way through the majority of the continent, you'll still want to have a couple of friends. And you also have Yvares here and Avalorn here. Those are playable factions, right? You would want to ally. It's going to be hard to fight them. And if you confederate them, you would get their legendary lord as well. So you'd add their strength to your roster. You probably want to do that if you can. But even as the diplomat route, you're going to have to fight people, right? You can't just fight none of the High Elves and eventually confederate everybody. You need to increase your power one way or the other, right? So that's kind of the question you have to ask yourself is, am I going to play a little more passively, a little more defensively, like focus on perhaps fighting my battles elsewhere, right? Leaving the island to take out like the pirates early on. We've got some greenskins over here that you're probably going to want to fight regardless. There's some Norska here, there's Norska here, and then there's the whole Dark Elf continent, right? Am I going to want to go there early and just make, you know, peace deals with as much of the island as I can? And really, I still don't think you would leave until like turn 30 to turn 50 because you're going to have to fight some of them, like I said. But ultimately, that, you know, you can leave it earlier if you're just going to confederate each person, each group one by one. Whereas if you're going to fight your way through, you don't really even need to worry about peace deals or anything. You just kind of bounce from one to the next and wipe people out and take whatever it is you desire, right? So just kind of a personal question that you have to ask yourself. Keep in mind that like different factions have different perspectives of one another. So like a trade deal with one group might help you in certain situations but hurt you in others. It's hard to kind of find. Yeah, here's a great example, right? Tyrannok and Illyrian don't like each other, right? So declaring war on Illyrian will make Tyrannok like you better. Making a trade deal with Illyrian will make Tyrannok like you less, right? So there's kind of that balance to keep in mind. The other thing is, if you go the diplomatic route, nothing's guaranteed, right? Depending on the strength of the faction, it doesn't matter how good your relations are, you might never be able to confederate them because they need to suffer, like, they need their military to be unstable enough that they don't feel they can protect their borders and would rather have you absorb them to help them, right? If you're not playing as Tyrion, it's really hard to confederate Eataine because he's like always strong and stable and just too prideful. The other thing is, if we look at like each faction, right, has these different kinds of like aggressive, guardian, wary. I want to see if we can find some that are different. Yeah, they're pretty much all the same. Oh, like here, right? Defensive rather than aggressive. Kotik is more concerned with maintaining borders than expanding them, right? So some factions will be more submissive than others. And so that's something you kind of have to take into account, right? It's going to be easier to get certain people to ally with you or to confederate with you than it is to get others to confederate with you based on their own personal attitude and, like, you know, their factions' like beliefs and approach to the game, right? Yeah, wary. Trusting fellow Asur is foolish, meaning it's probably going to be hard to convince them to confederate with you, right? That's a great example. The next thing I want to point out then is, in a similar vein, choosing who you ally with and who you go to war with doesn't have to be a guessing game, right? We talked about how there's mirror matchups, and I'm kind of breezing over the fact, yeah, you start at war with the Dark Elves here. They've got control of, like, your home province and then the nearby province. You're probably going to want to take care of that first. Outside of that, you have to pick and choose which High Elves to ally with and which High Elves to fight. But there's a really great way to determine that, to help make an easier decision. If you look at their attitude towards you, you can see how they feel about you. I can see here that Safari is probably not going to like me in the long run. Their aversion to me outweighs their tolerance of me. Whereas somebody like Illyrian, they just like me. There's no downsides here. Somebody like Kalidor, oh, they really don't like me, right? So looking at those kind of things can help shape your decision, right? I can see that Yvoress really likes me. I might want to help them take out the greenskins here, like the orcs and goblins here. But I'm probably going to want to be, if I'm playing diplomat, even if I'm not playing diplomat, I'm probably going to want to be peaceful towards them, right? Make an agreement with them, let them handle the eastern coast, and I can focus a different direction. And that's actually another part of it, is you can tell, you can see the inside, obviously, of the island is much easier to protect than the outside. The entire east coast is blocked by mountains. There's no way to cross this mountain range from the east. I know some of these border lines make it look kind of weird, but there's no way through here. In the west and in the north, there are passes, but they all have these gates, which are really, really well-defended single provinces, right? So I do kind of think that you should focus inland first. Try to sort, so we have to sort out this initial Dark Elf threat. Usually the next target I pick is Safari, because I know that they're not going to like me in the long run. And they're inside the ring, which is safer, right? If I take this territory, who's going to contest it? Another High Elf up here? No, because this is Avalorn, and they're going to be friendly towards me. It's going to be much easier to defend this, since I have, land and naval control right here at the entrance to the island, right? From there, I probably want to look west. You make allies with Tor Yvoress, and you look to the west. I can probably assume that Kalidor is going to attack me, and quite frankly, they're probably going to attack me while I'm busy doing something else. Whereas Illyrian, I could probably be allies with them. The main reason that I don't like to go west early on is because that exposes you to the Vampire Coast, the pirates here, as well as bringing you closer to the Dark Elf continent. It's very common for the Dark Elves to attack all along this western and northern border. And so the sooner you put yourself over there, the sooner you expose yourself to the threat of the Dark Elves. So that's kind of the decision making that you have to go through here, right? Early game, you have this immediate threat, right? From there, maybe help take down the greenskins if it's needed, and then focus inland and try to get everything sorted on the inside of the ring and just hold your position on the outside. Then when you feel you're ready, once you feel you've secured your either diplomatic or just conquest situation on the interior of the island, you look towards the exterior. Can I confederate Yvoress yet? Do I maybe want to secure the eastern flank and wipe out the Norska before even worrying about the Dark Elves? Or am I under threat from Kalidor? Is Tyrannok starting to dislike me? And do I want to try to push more to the west, right? And it kind of depends. It definitely depends campaign to campaign. Who rises to power and who falls will change a little bit each time. So the situation may be different. It's also a little bit personal preference. I think that the eastern flank is a little bit safer. So focusing on expanding here is going to be easier to manage. You're not going to have as many immediate threats. However, it's also easier to acquire these through diplomacy, right? All of these people really like you, so it's really easy to just wait them out and absorb them one by one. So that's kind of your early game and your mid game. once you have like half or more of the island under your control, especially once you have the whole island under your control, I mean, if your options then are sit on the island, wait it out until the ritual is completed, or kind of launch an invasion of the Dark Elf continent to the west. The one problem with the High Elf island is that there's not a lot of ritual resource materials here. I'm trying to even see, I know that there's one up here at the Shrine of Cain, and I know that the other one is down here at Calidor. Yeah, I can see the little blue aura. Whereas this southeastern continent has like 7 or 8 different points with the resources. So anyway, it makes it challenging in a way to race for the ritual, but it's simple enough to secure the island, and so once you do that, maybe you can launch an invasion to the northwest. Like the Dark Elves are your natural enemy. They pretty much all live up over here. So that's probably where I would recommend moving towards in the late game if you're looking to be aggressive. To the south, you have the Bretonnians here, and then you also have the Tomb Kings down here. And frankly, I think that allying with them in the long run, like not necessarily defensive or military allies, but just trade agreements, right? The Tomb Kings are pretty much always a neutral party, and since their land won't really be suitable for you, like they'll have desert territory, right, which is uninhabitable for you, there's really no point in you expanding to the south anyway. So this is a great opportunity for trade deals and potential allies. Even just kind of getting down there early on and giving them a trade deal would be a great way to make use of any elven trinkets that you've built up in the early game, right? Any of these buildings that you make, that's how you put them to use, is trade deals with people to your south. So that's generally what I think the overall course of this campaign looks like. How successful the Dark Elves are kind of fluctuates from campaign to campaign. To be honest, if you're playing, unless you really know what you're doing, when you're playing as the High Elves, you're actually, in a way, removing one of the greatest threats to the Dark Elves. But ultimately, with the ritual, like with the Vortex campaign, as long as you stop them from completing the final ritual by participating in that battle and winning it, you don't really have to like go over there and infiltrate them and disrupt them. I usually end up doing so because you get to a certain point where like the pace you acquire ritual materials at isn't fast enough, and so you have nothing better to do but go over there and start messing with them. But hopefully that helps you. This should kind of give you a general, like large-scale overview of not just how the race works, but also how the faction works and how this specific campaign plays out over the course of time. Again, if there's any questions or comments or feedback, go ahead and put them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Every time you play through one of these campaigns, you come up with something new. So I'm sure there's a lot of people with more experience in the High Elves as their favorite faction than I have. Anything that you'd like to say or any other kind of videos you'd like to see, what faction do you want to see me do next? What other kind of introductory videos do you think you might like to hear from me? If you got any suggestions like that, feel free to put them out there. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you on the next one.